Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, please click on like and subscribe. If you've been here before, welcome back. Today I'm going to be building a desk out of this pile of lumber here. Now I've got the cut list, I'm going to put it in the description below. But I've gone ahead and cut the lengths of wood I need for each piece, everything except for the crosses at the end. If you're at the point where you're ready to make a desk, I don't think you need me to show you how to cut a piece of wood. Just make sure when you cut them, they're all the same length and they're almost perfect, as good as you can get them. If you're new at building stuff like this, if you're off a little bit, the first couple ones you build, as long as you don't plan on selling them, they'll probably work fine. You'll probably be the only one that notices the differences. But the more you build, the better you want to make sure your boards are perfectly even. The tabletop itself, which is this pile right here, I've left my end boards, because I'm going to do breadboards on the end, a little bit longer. That way, when I get done, I can go across and I can snip everything off so the top is perfectly straight. So I've cut these a little bit longer than what I needed. These are my four legs, these are my support bars, these are my side supports.
So I've got my cut list laid out here. Basically, I've already got my lengths cut down to what I need. I'm going to take the 4x4s, which are actually 3.5 by 3.5 inches, and I'm going to skin those down to 3 inches by 3 inches on both sides. And I'm going to make my sides, my bottom, and my back pieces out of the 2x4s. I'm going to cut those down to 2 inches each. You can leave them 2.5, 3 inches, whatever size you want. I just want a little bit of offset on mine to give it a little bit of shape and a little bit of design. If you cut these at 3.5 inches or 3 inches, again, the 2x4 is 3.5 inches. If you slide the two sides off of it, you'll have a 3-inch board out of it. And I'm just going to skin the edge off. I've got the fence set to where it just barely takes that edge off the outside. The camera angle is a little deceiving. My fingers are not as close as it appears in the video. So now I got my two edges cut off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my other 3 legs. I'm not going to make you watch that. Doesn't make any sense to watch me cut the other 3 like this. I'm going to set my saw to 3 inches. I'm going to start by cutting this unfinished edge, flip the board again, cut this unfinished edge, flip it again, and just until I get it, all 4 sides should be 3 inches in diameter. So I've gone through and adjusted my blade to 3 inches. I've measured it 3 inches to the inside of this tooth here instead of the blade. That way I'll get a 3-inch by 3-inch board when I'm done. One last thing when I'm doing this, I'm using my edges that I put against the saw in the first place and cut them to run them through. So my unfinished edges are on the outside. I'm using my straight edges from the saw on the fence side of the board. That way I keep a nice straight form. And again, my fingers look really close to the blade, which they're not, but you should use a push stick no matter what. So after doing that, what I've got down here is 3 inches by 3 inches by 3 by 3. So I've got a perfectly square board for my legs. Now I'm going to take a round over, round these edges back off before I'm done, but right now I just want to finish getting all my boards down to size. This is my front, my back, my 2 sides. What I want to do is the same thing. I want to take this rounded over edge off of here, get a nice clean edge, flip the clean edge over, and cut it down to my 2-inch board. Now, as you can see, these 2x4s, these are just construction 2x4s. Again, I'm going for a farmhouse look. I'm not going for perfect look, but I'm still going to probably run these through the planer once just to get this, rough stuff off the edge. Again, you don't have to do that. You can hit it with a sander, knock down any swirls or burrs, paint it however you want to. So now that I got my outside edges cut off all my boards, I want to make this one 2 inches wide, so I'm going to set my fence to 2 inches. So this is my desktop. I want to make it 30 inches wide. So these 2 breadboards are a little bit over 30 inches long. That way when I attach them, I can go back through with a skill saw and trim off the edges so I've got a nice straight tabletop. I am going to mill them all down to 5 inches. So basically, same thing we did with the side pieces just a second ago. We're going to take this, trim off the edge on all these boards, flip them over, and make them 5 inches wide a piece. Now I'm going to put it at 5 1/8, even though I want my boards 5 inches wide, because I want to run them through the jointer. Now you don't have to do this. If your skill saw's nice and sharp or your saw's nice and sharp, you should get a nice clean edge down it. But if you get any of the little burrs or the little saw swirls on it, the extra 1/8 inch on each board will give me enough to trim it off without having to worry about having a gap or a seam in between my wood. And then if I have anything left over, if my desktop's too wide, let's say it ends up like 30¼ inches wide, I can just trim off 1/8 of an inch on both sides of it and you'll never see the difference looking at the tabletop. Here's my finished board, and like I said, I'm 5 and about 1/8 inch over. So when I go to line these up, if I don't get a good joint, which most of them will join up pretty well, but if I have any gap at all in here, that still gives me enough room to either sand it or run it through a joiner. If you don't have a joiner, just take some sanding, sand it down to where you get as nice of a connection as possible. Again, we're going to screw these and glue these, so the screws and the glue will hold it together or pull it together. But any stress you can get off the board before you screw it and glue it, you'll be less likely to have little pops or cracks later on. What I want to do now is not finish the wood, but finish the wood good enough that it'll be ready to assemble. Then we can prep, prime it, all that good stuff afterwards. Little things like this little swirl mark here, you could probably take your sander and sand this out. If you have a joiner or something like that, if you run across the joiner, a whole lot faster, although sometimes the joiner will leave little marks like that also. I'm probably just going to take like an 80 grit sandpaper and hit these real quick. I thought I was going to have to run these through the joiner, but after I cut off the excess, it doesn't look super bad. Again, we're using construction lumber. It's never going to be maple, oak. It's not going to be a perfect wood anyhow. Get as close as you can. You just don't want to see swirls underneath of your paint job. So I'm going to repeat that with all these boards, and then we're going to round over the edges. So I'm going to show you how to round over the edge real quick. Again, you don't have to do this. That's what I want to do with mine to make it look a little better. So I've just got a 1/4 inch round over bit. You can do 1/2 inch if you want, whatever size you want. Again, you don't have to round over at all. We have dogs in the house, but I don't have any children, but don't want the dogs cracking their head on a sharp piece of wood. So again, I'm just going to round over the 4 corners. So this is what it'll look like when you're done. You should have a nice smooth board. Should be rounded over on the edges again if you want to. If you're going to distress the board, you can distress it now if you want to. I'm going to hit it with one more sand. And if you're using construction lumber like I am, sometimes there's still dents and divots in here. So when you run your round over bit, you may dig in a little bit here and there. I've got mine set pretty good, but if you've got a little edge that sticks up, like right there's a little tiny bevel, if you hit it with a sander and just roll the sander over the edges real quick, you'll smooth that all out. So I've got my base ready to go. Basically, I've got all my pieces rounded over, sanded off as smooth as I want to smooth them. Again, I'm painting mine. If you were going to stain it or something, you might want to sand them down a little bit better. Getting ready to do my tabletop or my desktop. I'm going to run it through my joiner and my planer both. I'm going to run it through the planer first to get out any type of warps that are in there. And basically thin these down. I don't want my desk to be 1.5 inches thick. I want it to be about 1 inch thick. So that gives me a little bit of room to plane. I might leave it a little bit bigger than 1 inch, maybe 1.25 inches. So I'm going to thin this out, run it through my planer and joiner, get the edges smooth, and then we'll start putting in pocket holes and assembling. So now that I've ran these all through my planer, I'm going to put them in the joiner now just to get these swirls off and to make sure I've got a nice even butt on the boards. So when I put them together, they join up nice and tight. A little tiny crack, when you put in the screws and the glues and the clamp, will pull this out. But there'll always be stress on this board right here. So if you have a planer or joiner, run it through, get a nice smooth edge. If you don't, try to sand it down to where you get the smoothest edges possible. You can see where your high spots are. Take a pencil and mark your high spots. And just work it nice and even with the sander to get these as close as possible. Again, depending on the piece of furniture you're building, if you're building a rustic farmhouse piece, a little crack's not going to matter because it's supposed to look like that anyhow. So again, finish to whatever level you want. All right, so once they're out of your joiner, now you should be able to look at the boards and they should line up perfectly. You shouldn't see any gap at all. If you do, it'll be a really small crack maybe. And basically when you put the screws and the glue in it and clamp it, it'll pull that out. You just don't want anything big like that in there when you're putting the wood together, especially if it's gapped in the middle and then together on both ends. You got to get rid of that because again, the wood's going to expand and contract as it gets warm and cold, and eventually it'll pop that joint loose. I'm going to mark this up basically the way it's going to be framed. This is the side of my desk. I've got a couple 2x4s here. I just cut them off so it would hold this bar up here, so I've got some sort of an idea of where it's going to go. I've got my clamps in position. We're not going to clamp yet because we're going to do pocket holes. But I can mark my boards over here so I know where the tops of them are going to be. That way they're going to be even. Again, I'm going to paint this afterwards. If you want to paint it before, you can. If you got a sprayer, you can spray it afterwards, or you can roll it afterwards. I like to have my stuff together before I paint it. That's just me. I want my wood to make sure I got good contact, and I use wood glue on it. Again, this will probably hold together just fine with screws, but do it however you feel best. This is my good board for up here. This one's actually going to face this way. So what I want to do is I want to mark my screw holes on the opposite side of my face. So my face is going to be here. So I'm going to screw hole here and screw hole here. And this one, I'll pull it out. Since this is my top, I'm going to flip it over. Do my screws here, and I'm going to put a bottom, top. And that way when I'm looking at them, I know which way goes which. That's my bottom piece with the screws on it. That's my top piece, goes in like that. Now since our other side matches, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to find my good side. That piece right there's got a divot in it. I like this one the better, the bottom. So I'm going to put this on the bottom, so my screws are going to go here and here, and this will be my bottom. And then my top, I'm going to look at my other board again. I'm going to use this for my top. It'll go this way, so I'm going to do screw holes here and here. So our side pieces are essentially the same. If you imagine this spread wider, you can actually spread it wider if you need to mark it up or mock it up. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to flip this over, put it where I want it at. So this is going to be my top board. It's my top side. And my screw holes are going to be here and here. So that's the top board. So I need to find my other top board. So I'm going to find my best board for the bottom, because that's the one that's going to be exposed. That's probably this guy. So this is going to be my bottom board. Putting the screw holes, this is going to go underneath. So screw hole here, screw hole here. This will be my other top. Figure out which side looks the best. Make sure it's turned outward. This side looks better, so I'm going to put my screws inside, and this is going to be my top again. To make my life easier, I've got two pocket screw drill bits. You can do 3, 4, whatever you want. One, move the collar up and down. I've got this one set for, basically when we do this, we're going to do top screws. So we need to be shallower for the top. If not, we're going to dig too deep into it. So basically I've got my top here, so I know which side's my top. I'm going to use the 2 smaller screw holes here. Now if you want to measure this, you can. I'm just going to eyeball it, pop 2 screws in it, and flip it over. Like so. Flip it over, do the other side. And then what we want to do is we want to put some screws in the top so we can actually anchor the top to the base. So what I want to do with this, I took another piece of 2x4, cut off a sliver, 1.5 inches thick. The jig that I've got is set up for a 3.5 inch board. So if I put this board in here and lay it down, when I go to clamp it, it's going to drill a hole through the top of the board. So basically I've got to make up the extra distance that I cut off here. So since I cut this at 2 inches, I cut an 1.5 inch spacer. Put the 1.5 inch spacer in there, and now when I lay this on the top, when I clamp it down, my drill will drill through in the correct space instead of in the incorrect space. So I'm gonna So I'm ready to do our bottoms, and remember your bad side gets the pocket holes. So don't drill on the wrong side by accident. So again, we only need them on the ends on this, so we're going to use our longer bit again. So we're ready to do our long pieces for the front and the back. Now remember, your top ones will need screw holes to hold the top on. The bottom one will need screw holes on the ends. So I'm going to do it first. That's my top, my bottom. Again, I'm ready to put my top holes in. Again, just double check, make sure you get the right side. Since this is my worst side, I'm gonna flip it upside down, and drill my screw holes for the top there. Now this one, I'm not gonna measure it perfectly, but I'm gonna take my tape measure, string it across. I want 2 holes here, 2 holes here, and 2 holes here. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want them close as you can. So my boards are 46 inches, so I'm gonna do 23, which I've got pretty much lined up in there. After you do this for a while, you kind of get good at it. And you don't really need to tape measure as much for stuff like this. Precise things you do, but some things you just get used to eyeballing. I've got my spacer in the bottom again to make it 3 inches, 3.5 inches. So we're getting ready to assemble our base. So what I've done is I've taken a couple clamps to hold the top bar up, just so I don't have to try to hold on to it while I clamp it. And I've got 2 3.5 inch spacers at the bottom. It's basically a 2x4 turned sideways. Now I did that so I can lay that on there, and I've left enough space for my little robot to clean underneath the desk without crashing into the side of it. So I'll leave these clamps fairly loose. They're tight enough that they won't fall down, but that way I can bump up and down and get my board lined up where I want it to. Again, this is like having a couple more hands with you. If you're by yourself, it makes it easier to hold it in place. So once I get those boards lined up in the center, I'm going to take a long clamp or a bigger clamp, and I'm going to tighten it down to where they don't move. I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom. Again, I'm going to make sure I'm tight on top of my 2x4s there. I'm going to clamp it down, make sure I'm centered in the board. If you didn't do a complete 3.5 for the same width as your board, make sure you're centered up and nice and even, and then clamp it down tight on both sides to keep it from moving. So I went back and added a little bit of glue on both ends of each board, clamped them back down tight again, and I'm going to use a 2.5 inch screw to screw these together since we're putting it into a 2x4. Now when we put our top on, we're only going to use like 1.5 inch screw. If not, we're going to blow it right through the top of the board, and we don't want to do that. So after we get the bottom glued and clamped back together, we want to flip it upside down so we can put the screws in the bottom of the bottom. You don't want to put them through the sides because you don't want to see the screws. This way it'll hide them in there. Now on the bottom, I'm going to take a square and check and make sure I'm even. You don't want to get your legs off center. And again, make sure your base is really flat. Like the table I'm working on is a really flat surface. If your surface isn't flat and you screw this together, you might end up with one leg higher than the other, and you'll end up with a wobbly leg or a wobbly table or desk, whatever you're building. A couple minor adjustments and we're ready to screw it down. So once you get it in place, the screws will hold it in place for the glue to dry. You can leave the clamps on a while if you want to. And we're going to do the same thing on the back and the front. We're going to take our longer pieces, clamp them in, screw them down exactly like we did the other, flip it over, do the bottom. So you should end up with a base that looks like that. And I'm just test fitting the top on to make sure that it looks the way I want it to before I proceed to the sides. Okay, so I have the boards cut longer than what I need. I'm going to basically just eyeball this and get it pretty close to start with. I'm going to put my clamp on here. I'm just going to hold it in place with the clamps. If you have someone to help you, you could actually have them hold it in place, but it's easier to clamp it. I'm going to align this corner up where I want it at here. Let me get the camera on it. So it's basically overlapping that corner right there. So I'm kind of making a perfect corner with that. When I go to the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. If you had to, you can nip a little piece. Once you get your 45 or whatever your angle is cut, you can nip the piece off and make it fit a little bit. But if it fits too short, you leave a gap there. It doesn't look as good. So I've got that one clamped in place. And I did the same thing down here at the bottom. So whichever way you're going with your angle, your cross, clamp it in place like that. Next thing is on the inside, I'm going to take a pencil and mark my lines. And that's pretty obvious. Everyone gets to this point, no problem. That's common sense, and a lot of people just try to start nipping until they get the right angle. Back over to my piece. Did this right. You can tell right away if your angle's correct. And I'm going to have to nip just a little bit, so I'm going to take less than the width of the blade off of this one side and fit it back in. All right, so I'm going to mark these, which I've already marked the top piece so I know which one's which. I'm gonna slide this out. I'm gonna mark this one BR so I can match it with my BR over here. So just to save a second there, I went ahead and clamped this side on. Same thing, opposite angle. I'm gonna go in here, pencil mark it. Now when you do this, you can overlap these. So instead of actually cutting them in half like I'm gonna do, you can cut out half of the width of your board on both sides and lay them in against each other. Since this is a farmhouse piece of furniture, I'm not too worried about that. And I've got the grooves pretty close, so you can't really see them once it's painted. What I've done is I've taken a piece of scrap wood here, and I put a screw in there to determine how long I want my screw. Now with your pocket holes, the screw's gonna come at an angle. This is a 2-inch screw. This is gonna go plenty into my other wood without popping out through the top. So I've got my top laid out here on the table. What I did first was flip them all over, get them into the correct position where I wanted them at. So I've got all of the good looking boards on the top. I flipped it upside down. I'm marking the bottom now. Basically, I want to put 6 screws in each one of these boards. You can put 8, 10, 12, 20, however many you want in here. 6 is usually plenty enough, especially since we're gluing it also. So we're going to run a bead of glue down through here, and we're also going to put screws into it and clamp it in place. So I'm just going to pop some pocket holes in here real quick. Again, 6 is plenty for me. If you want to do 8, do 8. Once they're all done, you're going to end up with something like this. Now, I haven't done the breadboards yet, so we're going to do the breadboards. I basically want to get 2 screws on each end for sure. And then you can do 1 screw in each of the middle boards, or you can do 2 screws in the boards. Again, this is up to you how many screws you want to put in there. But between the glue and everything, that should hold it in nice and tight. Now, when you go to assemble this, you can do it 2 or 3 different ways. The way I'm doing it now is I'm doing individual boards. I'm going to clamp them as I go across. It just works better for me. My clamps are big enough. If I wanted to, I could clamp the entire section down and then screw them together. I think it's easier for me to get a nice level board if I do them 1 or 2 at a time, because I can get my fingers underneath there and make sure I've got a nice flat edge on both sides, and I don't end up creating a bow in the board or something I have to sand down later on. So I'm putting on a liberal amount of glue. I'm only going to glue the one side, but as you can see, the glue is pretty thick. You can glue both sides if you want to. You'll just have extra squish out. So basically, I just got a little heavier glue on one side than the other. As you can see, I'm making minor adjustments with my hammer and my fingers. I'm double checking to make sure everything's flat. And I also put a clamp at the end of each board. That keeps the ends of the boards nice and even while the glue's drying or while you're trying to line up the boards if you have any bow at all. Technically, you should have ran them through the planer, or I ran mine through the planer. I shouldn't have any bow at all. But still, sometimes when you go to clamp stuff down, it moves a little bit, and you have to make some minor adjustments here and there. So as you can see, I'm working my way across here. Basically, I'm just adding a board, moving the clamps, add a board, move the clamps, add a board, move the clamps. Again, if you want to, you could clamp the entire thing down, screw it all together at one time, whatever works better for you. Then once I get my last board on here, I'm going to slide the big clamps down, and I'm not putting a lot of pressure on them. It's basically just to kind of hold it all together while the glue's drying. Again, the screw's going to hold it in place, so as you can see where I'm placing my clamps, it's kind of in between the screw holes. Again, not going to do a whole lot of good. Makes me feel better, and the longer it stays together, the better it's going to hold together. And I'm just taking a damp rag and going to wipe off all the excess glue that I can. The more glue you get off, the easier it is when you go to sand it. If you leave glue on the board, glue doesn't stain. It will look like crap if you don't get it all off there. What I do is I'm going to straighten this edge off. So I made that side over there as close as I could get to even just by eyeballing it. So this side is my off side. So basically I'm going to take my skill saw and I'm just going to rip off maybe like 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch off this end, straight across, and I'll do the same thing on the other side so both of my end pieces are perfectly straight. Now there's a lot of ways to get straight edges across boards. This one's fast and easy. Especially if your boards are offset like this, because you can't really measure up 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, because every board's going to be different. If you take a couple squares, make sure your square's sitting nice and tight against your board. Put another square on the other side, and get to where you've got a nice straight line between both squares. Your end board will be cut off evenly. These clamps are just loose enough to hold the metal piece in place, or whatever you're going to use for a guide. Once you get it where you want it, clamp them down tight and run your skill saw across. Now my skill saw has 1.5 inch offset. So I made sure I'm at least 1 3/4 up into this board, because I'm only at like 1/8 inch off here. So I know for a fact I should nip all the way across this board. The next thing I'm doing is putting on my end boards, same as we put our other pieces together. Basically glue it up, clamp it down, shoot some screws in it, flip it over, and do the other side. So after I get the end boards on, I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to mark it off just like I did the other boards and cut off that little overhang so it's nice and even across the top of the desk. So our next step is one of everybody's favorites, and that is sanding. So basically what I've got to do is I've got to take a 60 or an 80 grit sandpaper. I'm going to go over all this, get all the yellow spots off from the glue, get it nice and level. There are a couple little ridges here and there where the 2x4s come apart just a little bit. I'm going to level all that out, so I'm going to sand it nice and even across there. We'll go back across it with a 120 when I'm done with that, and then we'll round over our edges, and I'll probably round the corners off a little bit. I'm not sure if I'm going to round the corners yet or not. I'll decide that once I get it sanded and see how it looks. So after about 2 hours of sanding, I'm doing the same thing I did on my legs earlier. I'm just taking a 1/4 inch round over bit, going around to knock off the edge of the desk so it's not a sharp, jagged line stabbing in the arm. I'm going to run the sander over it again one more time just to smooth it out. So after I clean off the top, I'm going to stain this board. Again, the SD card messed up on me, so I had to kind of edit some of this back in. But basically, I'm applying the first coat of stain. I'm just working it down in here with a rag really good. That way I get down in all the grooves. When I go back and do it the next time, I'll brush on a coat of stain, and I'm going to let it dry about 12 hours in between coats. I'm not going to sand. After about 5 minutes there, I just wiped off the excess after it started to dry up so I don't end up with a goopy board. 2 coats of poly later, and we have this. So here's our finished desk. Sorry again for the video malfunction. The only thing you really missed was me painting the base, an extra coat of stain on the top, and some coats of poly. Then I dropped the top on and used the screw holes we made in the base to attach the top. I used 1.25 inch screws in there. So I'm a good, probably 1 inch into the boards. Again, I planed those down. If I used anything bigger, I would have shot right through the top of it. Make sure you drop a comment down below. Let me know whether you liked it, didn't like it. There's something I need to change, think I'm doing something wrong, think I'm doing something right, tell you something new. Whatever it is, let me know, drop me a line. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please click on like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.